Redditors, what are your most interesting roommate stories? My roommate in college claimed he was involved with the mafia. He was constantly sweaty, was very jumpy, and always had a lot of cash in his car. He never was around on the weekends, and I never saw him drink. Strangest of all is that he never once slept in his room. He was always on the couch by the door. He eventually told me that it was because if someone ever broke in looking for him, he wanted them to find him right away, so no one else would get hurt. I still don't know if he was telling the truth, but nonetheless I always locked my bedroom door at night. My South Korean roommate in college played StarCraft 2? Not sure, well into the night. We're talking like I'd be getting up to go to class and he'd be logging off. It cured my insomnia. Listening to a game in a language I didn't understand was very soothing, apparently, and I went from taking 3 to 4 hours a night to fall asleep, if I would at all, to falling asleep within 30 seconds of laying my head down. I'm pretty sure I used to live with a hobbit. Man about 5 feet 1 inch, curly brown hair, constantly cheerful demeanor. Never wore shoes, inside or out. Literally slept on the floor in what can only be explained as a nest of blankets. Started a garden and encouraged me to eat his tomatoes all the time. Would bring home samosas and other goodies, always giving me half just because. He and his wife had a dream of living off the grid in a tiny home on a truck. I hope he's doing well. I used to cook dinner and always made enough to offer to our roommate. He paid his bills and rent always, but sometimes he didn't have enough for food, so I would cook and say, "Hey man, wanna have dinner with us?" He would usually say he didn't like whatever I was making. Fast forward to morning, all the leftovers were gone. His explanation? He must have been sleepwalking and ate it in his sleep. This happened 15 to 20 times over a year period. Minimum. He would make these big songs and dances about how what I was making was gross, so I would put up enough leftovers for two, my boyfriend and I, then go to bed. What was to be lunches for work gone and often dirty utensils in the sink. Fast forward another 5 years and he called me at 3 a.m. after not talking to me or my partner for 3 years and told me my now husband, aforementioned BF, was doing crack in front of our 4-year-old. I called my husband, who was asleep. Neither of us had talked to him in years. What was this? Fast forward another 5 years. He's on death row for killing his roommate. His defense? He did it sleepwalking. I own a house and rent out rooms in it. Right after I first got it, I was pretty strapped for cash and needed to rent out both of the rooms as quickly as possible, and unfortunately it didn't align with the usual lease start dates in town, university and college, so January, May, and September are the usual. I had a lady come, mid-30s, wanted the furnished room. I felt it was a little off. Why does this grown woman have no furniture? My friends basically scolded me for being judgmental. Maybe she just got out of a bad relationship, maybe she is new to the city, etc., etc. So I rented to her. Turns out she had just gotten out of jail for dealing meth. And honestly, she was better than the other one. She did her meth business in hotel rooms. She paid cash on time. She wasn't home a lot. One time she left her little meth scale in the living room, and it inspired me to get a food scale, which was a game changer in my weight loss journey. A serving of spaghetti is pathetically small, and I had no idea until I weighed it. Ended up making up a lie to get her to leave when she brought a strung-out friend home in the middle of the night, because that's a little much for me. Meanwhile, the other looked good on paper. She was an early childhood educator on the supply list. Except she was an alcoholic and heavy weed smoker. She never went to work because she never woke up in time. She never paid rent on time. She brought home a random group from the bar in the middle of the night on a Wednesday. She would take 3-hour-long baths in my only bathroom and was just not my type of roommate. Finally kicked her out when she started stealing booze from me. I caught her, warned her. She did it again a few days later. I called her out on it again, gave her a month's notice to move out, and she had the nerve to ask for the rest of the booze. So comparatively, the meth one was better. When he skipped out on rent and moved while I was at work, he left behind some of the most interesting corn I've seen. He was into amputees and urine. He also vomited on the carpet, never cleaned it up, and it ate through. I didn't get my deposit back. There are plenty, but one of my roommates used to sleepwalk and sleep talk almost every night, and I was the only one who'd be awake whenever it would happen. I'd witness her cleaning our fridge, sealing our open bag of chips, and I'd hear her quote Shakespeare in her sleep. What made her go back to bed was me asking her to sleep, and she'd look at me and close her eyes. Whenever I asked her if she recalled any of it, the answer was always no. My freshman year college roommate was a random pairing. This kid partied all night and slept all day, legit wouldn't wake up until 5 p.m. He goes MIA for like a week. I call my mom because I'm not sure he's even alive. She searches to see if he has been arrested. Before she can call me back, the cops are knocking at our door and ask, "Have you seen blank?" And I say no. Mom calls me back a few minutes later. He had been booked for robbery at a convenience store which was in our dorm building. He tried to hide in an air vent. He made the front page of the campus newspaper, was expelled, and I got the whole dorm to myself for the rest of the fall and spring semester. My first ever roommate freshman year of college was one of the most impressive people I had ever met. He had a great job that covered his cost of living and tuition. This is 2006, had his own place, was getting great grades in a tough program, and was with an amazing woman. I was super stoked when he offered to let me rent the second room. Over the next year, I watched all that fall apart due to a sudden and overwhelming World of Warcraft addiction. I can still remember the time when I was trying to get him to log off because he was about to miss this long-standing, fancy night out with his girlfriend. He looked at me with genuine remorse and said I can't. She was majorly depressed. She worked a lot and for very little money, so she would mostly come home and lock herself in her room. At some point, she stopped cleaning or doing laundry. She worked at a childcare center and at some point contracted impetigo. Gross, but treatable. She wouldn't get it treated, however, because it was too expensive. So I lived in fear I would contract it, let alone the other kids she was watching. She told her work it was being treated and was no longer contagious. They just believed her. She had these massive, crusty patches all over her face and just didn't care. After 5 whole weeks, she finally went to the doctor. Things were tense until her mom came to visit a few weeks later and convinced her to be committed. She had been sending not wanting to live messages to her mom every day for weeks. Her mom paid her rent for the next 3 months until the lease was up, and she moved back home. Never spoke again. Hope she is doing better. I had a college roommate who was obsessed with CSI. She had a CSI pillow and sheets/blankets. She refused to turn on any lights and kept all blinds shut. She hated light and would sigh loudly if I would turn the lights on to do anything. I went to college right around when you needed a college email to make a Facebook, and she would tell me that Facebook is how they spy on you. She said she would never have a MySpace or anything of the like. She might have been right on that one, and she would always say I was a sheep and that I would have my identity stolen by them. My other roommate, we were 4 with 2 bedrooms and a common area, was extremely loud at all hours, and if you ever asked her to keep it down, even very politely, she would purposely start doing cartwheels and banging on things and singing. She claimed to be Jay Leno's niece. One more, I had a roommate that slept with a new guy every weekend, and we could hear her loudly through the wall. We would tell her we heard her, and she vehemently denied every time that she slept with anyone. Come on, girl. My roommate in first year started doing pleasure work, and we had to have the "please don't bring random men to our dorm room" talk. Aside from it being really against the rules of the residence we lived in, I got propositioned by her sugar daddy/pimp for 3 sons and was feeling unsafe with the whole situation. I had a very religious roommate once named Mike who thought I was religious too, I guess, and he would often exclaim things like, "OMG Kittenclin. There's so many people outside. We should be evangelizing." He would never read any books except the Bible, literally, and he would often pray right in the middle of the common space on his hands and knees. Weird guy, but he always paid his rent on time, kept his dishes clean, and it's hard to find roommates. Anyway, one day while I was reading a book in the living room, Mike came out looking very concerned and asked to talk. "I think there's a demon living in this house," he said. I'm the kind of person who likes to yes and people, especially when they say something a little crazy. So I asked him to tell me more. Well, he started, last night I had a dream, no, not a dream, a nightmare. A snake was choking me, and I was fighting with it. He exaggerated hand movements a little aggressively to demonstrate his wrestling. Finally, I threw it off of me, but then I realized I was awake, so I sat up and looked over at your side of the bed, and that's when I saw it. Saw what? I asked, more excited by the second. The demon. The dark cloud man was just standing next to your bed, watching you sleep. He was like a cloudy shadow with white eyes. I think it's possessing the house. Amazed by what he was saying, I asked what we should do about it. Have an exorcism. I almost spit out my drink. Well, I've never done that before. I have, he interrupted. So I was like, well, if you say so. Anyway, basically he had blessed holy water from the tap and was walking around the room tossing it here and there yelling, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave, demon. Meanwhile, I'm trying not to laugh for the whole 30 minutes until he finishes. He's literally sweating in prayer and finally stands up to say it is done and walks to his room. We never talked about it ever again. I had a roommate for several years who was a decent guy, quiet, cleaned up after himself, respectful. The poor guy's life was terrible. He dropped out of high school at age 17. Then he started selling grass, which he was arrested for by an undercover cop. Being uneducated, he ended up with a felony on his record, permanently. Throw on top of that, having a child and things not working out with his baby mama, so he owed child support. This guy was working as a dishwasher at restaurants for $10 an hour, probably less. This was from 2010 to 2015 when we were roommates. He had no car, and the closest bus route to where we lived was a mile walk, uphill, from our apartment. He did this every day. One day I was talking to my dad, who loves to ride bicycles and has many, if one could be offered to my friend. He put some new pedals on a road bike of his, that's all he had, and I gave it to my friend. On the third day after he had been given the bike, I was awoken randomly to knocks on my bedroom door and some mumbled speech. I opened my door and there's my roommate, with his hand up to his face, covered in blood and maybe a tooth in there. He had placed his bag of clothes on the handlebar, and the drag from the front tire pulled the bag in and caused him to face plant on concrete. I remember taking him to the hospital, and he asked me to look at his mouth. Good God. This has a happy ending, or something like it. After this injury, he had enough with walking to the bus, so he got a second job and began saving up to buy a car. For the first few weeks though, this guy was walking to the bus and then working a 16+ hour day. There was a gap between jobs where he couldn't rest much, so was probably getting 4 hours of sleep a night. He was saving funds, and due to his child support, he could only eat banquet $1 frozen dinners. All day. That's all he had was one of those. He eventually got the car and his quality of life got marginally better before he parted ways. He ended up moving in with family and closer to bus lines. Maybe not the most extraordinarily interesting story ever, but nonetheless, what that guy went through, I can't imagine. He used to tell me when he was walking home at night, he often contemplated stepping into oncoming traffic. Thankfully, he never did. After we both left the apartment and went our separate ways, we kept in touch. However, he frequently had phone issues when we lived together and had several different numbers in 5 years. I reached out to him to check in 5 years ago and never heard back. I hope he's okay. Senior year of college, I lived with 8 other students in a house, girls upstairs and boys downstairs. One time the boys were really rowdy, so I went downstairs to check it out, and this girl from my literature class was beating in their fridge with a fire extinguisher. I think I've lost the ability to be surprised after that year. Freshman year of college, I was randomly assigned a roommate to share a tiny room, 11 feet by 15 feet, I think. I was a quiet computer science student from the San Francisco area who liked video games and D&D. My assigned roommate was a huge mechanical engineering major from the South who liked his lifted truck, dip tobacco, and getting drunk as often as possible. Needless to say, the next 6 months were not fun. He left his spit cups everywhere, constantly played loud country music, and messed around with my stuff, including scratching a nasty slur into my Office Space-esque stapler. As the year went on, he seemed to get worse, probably due to finding a group of like-minded people in the dorms. Long story short, he was kicked out of the dorms about 2 weeks before the spring break. He and another guy went on a rampage through the dorm with air, soft guns pew-pewing the little whiteboard on everyone's door. For some reason, though, he was allowed to stay until the break. I stupidly left for home before he did, and when I got back, my very nice gaming PC was missing. I reported it missing and told the police exactly where I thought it was, at his new place. They apparently searched it, and though they didn't find my computer, they found enough other stolen goods to get him expelled from school. Thankfully, my replacement roommate was a very nice, quiet guy, and the rest of the year went well. My freshman year roommate would think way too much when he was trying to fall asleep and wake me up all the time. Like, hey man, a lot of people find the person they marry in college. What if I never find that person? Or after a celebrity and alive, hey man, people should never off themselves. Me, huh? It's 2 a.m., dude, I have class at 8. But sure, I agree. Oh, sorry to wake you up, go back to sleep. 5 minutes later, he wakes me up again. Unless you're on fire, then that makes sense. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Also check out our other videos and have an amazing day.